Hi, I want to welcome you to day 4 of our Passover diary. Now, I want to just say a couple of things because this Passover diary, day 4, is scheduled to be April 5th. Now, I realized if some of you might have noticed this too, I've messed up the schedule a couple of times, but I'll be sending you a more complete schedule so you can follow it day by day. Don't worry about if you've already gone through this before April 5th, which is Sunday, but it doesn't really matter so much. It's just what matters is the path that we're following along for this. And I hope that you're finding it to be a very provocative time for you, a time for you to meet with God and talk about things maybe that with Him and let Him speak to you things He's never spoken to you before. And that's really what this time is about, because God's doing some very profound things at this time this year. Now, I'm not going to take so long today, but I want to just help you focus for just a moment on the psalm that you'll be looking at today. It's Psalm 77. Psalm 77 is a very interesting psalm because in it he comes face to face with his circumstances, which are less than desirable, if not even oppressive. And it's so filled with things that are unknown and things that look desperate and have created a whole sense of struggle for the gentleman who wrote it. Any one of us today could be writing similar words to this. But in this particular psalm, there's two things that are dealt with in the psalm. One of them are the questions that are raised in moments like this. Questions like, how long is this going to go on? Questions like, what's wrong with things? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with things around me? Why is this happening to me? Questions like, is it all gone? Is everything over? Is everything I've done over for good? But probably the most significant question that comes out of it is, has God forgotten about me? And it raises all kinds of questions about God and the same kinds of questions that we have. So this will be a time for you to explore with the Lord. Let the Lord know what your questions are. I try not to hold back from the Lord. I try to tell him how I see it, how I feel about things. I'm not interested to try to convince him because he already knows how I feel. I'm there to tell him how I feel, not simply to dump on God emotionally, but so that I can get it all out there in the open. And then God can speak to me, and what he speaks to me will help me to see whether the way I'm expressing and feeling and doing things, of whether it's going to be useful, good for my life, or whether I'm going off in a completely a direction that's completely going to fail me. It helps me to see if God's thoughts are my thoughts, or my thoughts are God's thoughts. And when he speaks to me, what he says, I can take what he says. And if mine isn't in agreement with what he says, I can get rid of my thoughts and take his thoughts. It's part of what goes into renewing your mind. But as this particular person in this Psalm 77, as he asks all of these questions, he stops at one point and he says, I've got to do something. And I think at least 4 different times in the psalm, he says, I chose to remember certain things. He remembered how God had done things in his life in the past. He remembered what God had said, what his experience with God, not only with him, but with his forefathers, what it was like. He began to remember. You see, here's the point. When we're in a time where we're wondering if God has forgotten, that means it's a time for us to remember what God has done, because what he has done in our lives in the past is a demonstration of what he'll do in our lives in the future. Just 3 years ago, when I turned age 60, I started listening to certain ads on my television that would come about every morning during the morning news hour. I would watch the news each morning, and each morning there were advertisements of people talking about how they had prepared for their retirement. Now, I'm not retired, but I'm not too far from an age of retirement. And these ads were saying, oh, people planned and they did this, and thus are able to make these decisions and make these choices. And as I listened to those ads, it began to concern me, because I could remember many years ago when I was first beginning in ministry at age 25, I began to make the kinds of decisions that would affect the course of my life. And I always tried to make those decisions. I didn't always make them this way, but I tried to endeavor to make the kind of decision that would always put the Lord and his way in front of my own. And so oftentimes I was making decisions that didn't make good financial sense. And so as I was coming to this point at age 60, where I was looking not too far in the future to a retirement, I looked at it and I said, Lord, have I just completely messed it up? Or I didn't ask the Lord, I was laying it on myself that I had messed it up. All of a sudden, the Lord spoke to me, and he said to me, he said, for the past 35 years, actually 40 years, I've taken care of you. Why would I stop now? And when the Lord spoke that to me, I began to think back over my life, not just my professional life, but all of my life. Instances in my personal life, in the life of my family, where there weren't resources to do certain things. There weren't the opportunities to go places, whatever, that people choose when they make those kinds of good financial decisions. But yet I found that in all of those moments, God always came through in a way that was far superior to what I've ever could have prepared for. And that's what I want to share with you today. I want to encourage you to reflect back on those times in your life when there was no way through. There was no way to overcome. You were at the end of things. Reflect back on those moments when you might have wondered in the past, has God forgotten me? Or maybe you didn't know God in the past, and it looked like life had abandoned you. And then something happened that redirected the course of your life. Okay? You want to recall what God has done for you in the past, because he hasn't forgotten you. And he's going to, if you'll stay in alignment with him and listen to him, he'll walk you through these circumstances into a whole new level of connection with him and a whole new level of his promise of blessing in our life. It's interesting, at the end of this psalm in verse 19, as the psalmist is getting to his conclusion, or the end of what he is talking about with the Lord, he says to the Lord, Lord, your path led through the sea. He was talking about ancient Israel at the time of the Passover, when they had just left Egypt and came out to the Red Sea. And God could have led them another way that would have gone on land, that they would have encountered no natural obstacles to the way they were going, where they could have easily fled Pharaoh and his army. But God chose to take his people to a place where this army could catch up to them and where they were blocked or obstructed by the Red Sea. It's very interesting. They were in a very tight place. In fact, at that very moment, the scripture records that Moses began to cry out to God, basically saying, oh God, help us, help us, help us. And then God said to him, why are you praying? He says, speak to the sea. Okay. You see, there are times when we're on God's path, God brings us to something, not because it is to stop us. He's brought us to a place to show us a way through that we never would have found on our own. And because we belong to him, he's giving us, by his breath, a living in us. by his words and his voice, which has power that he speaks into us and we can carry. He will show us a way to walk through the greatest of obstacles that would normally kill a person. That's what these times seem like, but God has a way through this sea of difficulty called COVID-19. As I was also thinking about this, I remembered a song that I learned a number of years ago when we first moved to Russia. It was a song sung by a Christian group at that time called the Imperials. I want to show you the words to this song. And then at the end, after you've watched this, I will have forwarded you a link that you can go to where you can hear the song. Let me show you the words to this song. Here are the words of the chorus. It says, "He didn't bring us this far to leave us. He didn't teach us to swim to let us drown. He didn't build his home in us to move away. He didn't lift us up to let us down." Now that's what I want you to declare today as you go through this time reading Psalm 77. This will be part of the way that you remember and you etch in your memory, not the circumstances of what's taking place around you, but what God has done before, what God is doing now, and what God will do in the days ahead for you. That's what we're about. That's what he wants us to do. Again, you'll find the link in your WhatsApp to the song sung by the Imperials so you can hear how it sounds, and it repeats this chorus again and again. Now, I want to alert you to the fact that next Saturday, on the 11th of April, we're going to have an international Passover gathering on Zoom. So you can gather together with others from at least four different continents to enter this Passover, the day of Passover, around the world, but do it in the comfort of your own home with your own computer or phone. Now, we have a limited amount of space, several hundred, so there's plenty of room. But we're going to be sending you some information by which you can then decide to be a part of this. You can register so that we'll be ready for you, and then we'll send you some things that will prepare you in advance. We're going to be doing this Passover at a time that is in the evening in China and in the eastern part, the far eastern part of Asia. So just know that. It means that in the U.S., it'll begin early in the morning at 7 a.m. for those on the East Coast, 6 a.m. for those in Central Standard Time where I live. For those in Asia, it'll be 7 hours. In Africa, it'll be 7 hours beyond that. So that means about 2 in the afternoon. So anyway, you'll be able to figure that out and check that out, and you can join us on April 11th as we come to this point where we call upon the Lord to sever our old connections to the world system of greed. And when we call on him to connect us in a new way to his covenant of blessing.